The Millbrook County Courthouse stood as a stoic sentinel against the brooding October sky, its weathered facade a testament to decades of whispered secrets and thunderous proclamations of justice. The morning air clung with the scent of damp leaves and distant chimney smoke, a reminder of the season's slow march toward winter. Alexis Carter, her tailored coat buttoned tightly against the chill, paused at the base of the courthouse steps. The weight of her briefcase was nothing compared to the burden she carried, an entire community's hope for change. Her fingers brushed the small scales of justice pin on her lapel, its cool metal grounding her in the legacy she sought to honor. The square in front of the courthouse buzzed with life. Protesters waved signs that clashed like dueling ideologies, their voices rising in a cacophony of conviction. Journalists jostled for position, their cameras poised like weapons aimed at the heart of the unfolding drama. Amid the chaos, Alexis's gaze remained steady. She had faced adversity before, but this case was different. It wasn't just a fight for her clients, it was a fight for the soul of Millbrook itself, a town grappling with its own reflection in the mirror of progress. Inside, the courthouse exuded an air of solemnity, its high ceilings and dark wood paneling amplifying every sound. Judge William Hawthorne adjusted his robes with a precision born of decades on the bench, though his mind was far from routine. The photograph in his desk drawer, a relic of his father's unwavering belief in the law, had haunted him that morning. The case before him, a class action lawsuit against Apex Industries, was a powder keg of social tension. He knew the community's divisions ran deep, but even he couldn't predict how far the ripples would spread. In the jury box, 12 individuals sat in uneasy silence, their faces a mosaic of Millbrook's past and future. Frank Delaney, a lifelong resident with hands as rough as the factory floors his family had worked for generations, clutched his father's pocket watch. Across from him, Maria Suarez, a newcomer with dreams as vibrant as her homeland's sunlit shores, observed her fellow jurors with quiet intensity. Each carried their own truths, their own prejudices, their own fears. And each, knowingly or not, would be changed by the trial ahead. As the courtroom settled, the defense table gleamed with corporate polish. Charles Whitmore III, Apex's lead counsel, exuded an air of unshakable confidence. His every movement, precise, deliberate, spoke of a man accustomed to winning. But as Alexis rose to deliver her opening statement, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade, the balance of power in the room seemed to shift. This trial was more than a legal battle, it was a crucible. It would expose long-buried truths and demand answers to questions Millbrook had long avoided. For Alexis, it was a chance to honor her grandmother's legacy and carve a path toward justice. For Judge Hawthorne, it was a reckoning with his own convictions. And for the jurors, it was an invitation to confront the biases that shaped their lives. As the gavel struck, the first chapter of this unfolding story began. What lay ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear, the verdict would echo far beyond the courthouse walls, altering lives and legacies in ways no one could yet imagine. The story unfolds in the sprawling continent of Illuria, a land of fractured kingdoms and ancient ruins, where magic hums faintly in the air, a remnant of a bygone era. Illuria is divided into 4 distinct regions, the frost-bitten peaks of the north, the dense, humid jungles of the south, the golden deserts of the east, and the fertile plains of the west. Each region is governed by warring factions, their alliances fragile and their motives shrouded in secrecy. The sky is often tinged with hues of violet at dusk, a phenomenon attributed to the lingering energy of the Great Sundering, a cataclysmic event that tore the continent apart centuries ago. Hidden within the ruins scattered across the land are relics of immense power, fiercely sought after by treasure hunters, scholars, warlords alike. At the heart of the story is Cale Draven, a brooding mercenary with a mysterious past. Once a knight of the Western Dominion, Cale abandoned his post after a betrayal that cost him his honor and the life of his younger brother. Haunted by guilt, he now roams Eloria, taking on dangerous jobs to survive, though he secretly seeks redemption. Cale is a man of few words, his weathered armor and scarred face telling a story of countless battles. Despite his gruff exterior, he has a strong moral compass, often finding himself at odds with the ruthless world around him. His only companion is a sentient blade named Ashen, forged from the remnants of a fallen star. The blade speaks in whispers only Cale can hear, offering cryptic advice and warnings, though its true motives remain unclear. Opposite Cale is Lyra Vane, a cunning thief from the southern jungles with a knack for finding things that should remain hidden. Lyra grew up in the shadow of the Emerald Syndicate, a notorious guild of smugglers and assassins. Her quick wit and nimble fingers allowed her to survive, but she dreams of breaking free from the Syndicate's grasp and forging her own destiny. Lyra is fiercely independent, her sharp tongue and sly smile masking a deep-seated fear of vulnerability. She crosses paths with Cale when they both seek the same artifact, an ancient compass said to lead its wielder to the heart of Eloria, a mythical source of untold power. The third key figure is Arinder, a disgraced mage from the eastern deserts who once served as a royal advisor. Banished for experimenting with forbidden magic, Arinder now travels in search of knowledge that could restore his reputation. His appearance is striking, with glowing runes etched into his skin, a side effect of his experiments. Arinder is pragmatic and calculating, often clashing with Cale's idealism and Lyra's impulsiveness. Despite their differences, the three are forced into an uneasy alliance when they discover that the compass is the key to stopping an ancient evil that threatens to plunge Eloria into chaos. As the trio journeys across the continent, their motivations evolve. Cale begins to see the possibility of redemption not just for himself, but for the fractured world he inhabits. Lyra wrestles with her desire for independence versus her growing loyalty to her companions. Arinder, initially driven by selfish ambition, starts to question the cost of power. Together, they must navigate a land rife with danger, uncover the truth behind the heart of Eloria, and confront their own inner demons. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Alexis Carter unveiled a damning piece of evidence, a confidential Apex Industries memo revealing deliberate efforts to exclude minority candidates from key positions. Gasps rippled through the gallery, and Charles Whitmore's confident facade faltered for the first time. Judge Hawthorne's stern gaze lingered on the defense, while the jury exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the trial's seismic implications. The small town of Alderidge buzzed with the arrival of the annual Harvest Festival, a cherished tradition that brought together locals and visitors alike. Among the crowd was Clara, a fiercely independent baker determined to win the festival's coveted Best Pie Award, a title her late mother had held for years. For Clara, this wasn't just about recognition, it was a way to honor her mother's legacy and keep her struggling bakery afloat. Meanwhile, Ethan, a reserved botanist new to town, had a different goal: to secure funding for his research on sustainable farming methods. His work could revolutionize the town's agriculture, but he needed the support of the festival's influential sponsors to move forward. Their paths crossed when Clara, in desperate need of fresh, high-quality ingredients, stumbled upon Ethan's small greenhouse on the outskirts of town. Intrigued by his unconventional methods, she proposed a partnership. She would showcase his produce in her pies, giving him exposure, while he would supply her with the finest ingredients. Reluctantly, Ethan agreed, though he was wary of the festival's competitive atmosphere. Clara's fiery determination clashed with Ethan's cautious pragmatism, leading to frequent disagreements about everything from pie recipes to presentation. Despite their differences, they began to develop a mutual respect as they worked together, each recognizing the other's passion and dedication. As the festival drew nearer, obstacles began to mount. Clara's bakery faced sabotage when a rival baker, jealous of her growing reputation, tampered with her supplies, leaving her short on key ingredients. Ethan, on the other hand, struggled to convince the festival sponsors of the practicality of his research, as they dismissed him as an outsider with unproven ideas. To make matters worse, the greenhouse was damaged during an unexpected storm, threatening both Clara's pies and Ethan's presentation. These setbacks tested their resolve and forced them to confront their own vulnerabilities. Clara, who had always prided herself on her self-reliance, reluctantly admitted she couldn't do everything alone. Ethan, who preferred to avoid conflict, realized he needed to stand up for his work if he wanted to make an impact. Amid the chaos, their partnership deepened into something more personal. Clara opened up about the pressure she felt to live up to her mother's legacy, while Ethan shared his struggles with feeling like an outsider in a close-knit community. Their shared moments of vulnerability fostered a growing bond, though neither was ready to fully acknowledge it. Meanwhile, subplots unfolded around them. Clara's younger brother, a budding musician, grappled with stage fright as he prepared to perform at the festival, and Ethan's estranged father unexpectedly arrived in town, seeking reconciliation after years of silence. These threads added layers to their individual journeys, highlighting the importance of family, forgiveness, and personal growth. As the festival approached its climax, Clara and Ethan faced a pivotal decision. Would they risk everything to achieve their goals, or would they find a way to redefine success on their own terms? With time running out, they had to confront not only the external challenges but also their own fears and insecurities. Together, they began to realize that their partnership was more than just a means to an end. It was a chance to create something truly meaningful, both in their work and in their lives. The morning began like any other in the quiet coastal town of Greyhaven. The air carried the faint scent of salt water, and the streets buzzed with the usual hum of fishermen unloading their early catch and shopkeepers preparing for the day. For Clara, it was just another predictable day at her family's bookstore, a place where the most excitement came from an occasional customer requesting an obscure novel. But as she unlocked the shop's creaky door, the bell above it jingling softly, something felt off. The air inside was heavy, almost suffocating, and there was a faint, metallic tang that set her on edge. Her eyes were drawn to the counter, where a plain, unmarked envelope sat, though she was certain it hadn't been there the night before. Hesitant, Clara opened the envelope, her hands trembling slightly. Inside was a single sheet of paper bearing a cryptic message written in jagged handwriting. *, the answers you seek lie where the ocean meets the forgotten. Beneath the note was a map, old and weathered, marked with an unfamiliar symbol near the cliffs just outside town. Clara's heart raced. She had no idea who had left the envelope or what it meant, but the mention of answers struck a nerve. For years, she had been haunted by the mystery of her father's disappearance, a fisherman who had vanished without a trace when she was a child. Could this be connected? The thought was absurd, yet she couldn't shake it. Before she could fully process the note, the shop's front door swung open violently. A man she had never seen before stumbled in, his face pale and his clothes soaked through as though he had just crawled out of the ocean. "You need to leave," he gasped, his voice hoarse and urgent. "They're watching. They know you've seen it." Clara froze, clutching the note tightly. Before she could ask who they were or what he meant, the man collapsed to the floor, unconscious. Panic surged through her as she scrambled to help him, but her mind was already racing. Whoever he was, his warning was clear. She was in danger, and it had something to do with the envelope. Clara's instincts told her to call the authorities, but something stopped her. The man's words, the cryptic note, and the map all pointed to something bigger, something she couldn't ignore. She had spent years yearning for answers about her father, and now, for the first time, it felt like she might be on the verge of uncovering the truth. But the urgency in the man's voice and the ominous tone of the note suggested that this wasn't just about her family, it was something far more dangerous. Determined, Clara made a decision. She would follow the map to the cliffs, but she wouldn't go alone. She reached out to her childhood friend, Ethan, a local journalist with a knack for uncovering hidden truths. Together, they would face whatever lay ahead. Yet as she locked the bookstore and glanced back at the unconscious man, a chilling realization settled over her. Whatever she was stepping into, there would be no turning back. The quiet life she had known was over, and the storm that had been brewing beneath the surface of Greyhaven was about to consume her. The courtroom buzzed with a tense energy as the first witness for the plaintiffs took the stand. Alexis Carter's voice was steady as she guided the witness, a former Apex Industries employee named Darnell Hughes, through his testimony. Darnell, a soft-spoken man in his late 40s, recounted years of being passed over for promotions despite glowing performance reviews. His words painted a picture of quiet resilience in the face of systemic barriers, and as he spoke, the jury listened intently, their expressions a mix of skepticism and dawning understanding. In the gallery, Jake Thompson, the young journalism student, scribbled furiously in his notebook. His professor had sent him to cover the trial as part of a class assignment, but Jake quickly realized this was more than just a grade. The raw emotion in Darnell's testimony struck a chord, igniting a passion for uncovering stories that mattered. Jake's mind raced with ideas for how he could frame the trial in a way that captured its significance, not just for Millbrook but for the nation. Meanwhile, in a quiet corner of the courthouse, a janitor named Earl Watkins paused his work to listen to the proceedings through the slightly ajar courtroom doors. Earl, a lifelong Millbrook resident, had seen the town's unspoken hierarchies play out in ways most people ignored. He had his own stories of Apex Industries, stories he had never shared. As he leaned on his mop, Earl wondered if this trial might finally give him the courage to step forward and add his voice to the growing chorus. Back in the courtroom, Charles Whitmore III rose to cross-examine Darnell. His tone was sharp, his questions calculated to sow doubt about the credibility of the witness. Whitmore's reputation for dismantling opposing arguments was well-earned, and his polished demeanor exuded confidence. But as he pressed Darnell, a subtle shift occurred. The jury's attention seemed to waver, some members exchanging glances that suggested unease with Whitmore's aggressive tactics. Alexis watched carefully, noting the cracks in the defense's strategy. Outside, the protests had swelled in size. On one side of the courthouse steps, a group of local activists held signs demanding justice and equality. Among them was Tasha Green, a high school teacher who had taken the day off to stand in solidarity with the plaintiffs. Tasha had grown up in Millbrook and knew firsthand the challenges faced by people of color in the town. Across the way, a smaller but equally vocal group of counter-protesters gathered, their chants underscoring the deep divisions within the community. As the day wore on, Judge Hawthorne called a recess, his face betraying the strain of the intense proceedings. In his chambers, he sat alone, the faded photograph of his father once again in his hand. The weight of the case pressed heavily on him, forcing him to confront questions he had long avoided. Could the law truly be impartial in a world so deeply shaped by prejudice? And what would his father have done in his place? In the jury deliberation room, the dynamics among the jurors began to shift. Frank Delaney found himself in an unexpected conversation with Maria Suarez during the break. Her perspective as an outsider to Millbrook challenged his assumptions in a way that was both uncomfortable and enlightening. Maria, in turn, saw in Frank a man grappling with change, his resistance tempered by an underlying decency she hadn't expected. Their exchange hinted at the possibility of common ground, though it was clear the road to understanding would not be an easy one. As the courthouse emptied for the evening, the tension lingered like a storm cloud. The trial was far from over, and the stakes only seemed to grow with each passing day. For Alexis, Jake, Earl, Tasha, and countless others, this was more than a legal battle. It was a fight for the soul of a community, a reckoning with truths too long ignored. The wheels of justice continued to turn, but no one could predict where they would lead. The courtroom buzzed with a quiet intensity as Alexis Carter began her opening statement. Her words were sharp and deliberate, cutting through the tension like a scalpel. She painted a vivid picture of the systemic barriers faced by the plaintiffs, weaving their personal stories into a broader narrative of injustice. Each sentence was a challenge to the status quo, a direct confrontation with the deep-seated inequalities that had been allowed to fester in Millbrook for decades. Across the room, Charles Whitmore III sat impassively, his expression unreadable, though his fingers tapped rhythmically against the table, betraying a hand of unease. As the trial progressed, the stakes grew higher. Testimonies from former Apex employees revealed a pattern of exclusion and bias that was difficult to ignore. One witness, a soft-spoken man named Marcus Reed, recounted years of being passed over for promotions despite his impeccable record. His voice cracked as he described the humiliation of training younger, less qualified colleagues who were swiftly elevated above him. The jury shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the weight of his words pressing down on the room. Frank Delaney found himself grappling with conflicting emotions, loyalty to the company that had sustained his family for generations, and a growing recognition of the injustices laid bare before him. Meanwhile, outside the courthouse, the atmosphere was equally charged. Protesters clashed on the courthouse lawn, their chants and slogans a cacophony of anger and defiance. Among them was Jake Thompson, the young journalism student, scribbling furiously in his notebook as he captured the raw emotion of the moment. Jake had initially come to the trial out of curiosity, but as the days unfolded, he found himself drawn deeper into the story. His late-night articles, posted to a small but growing online audience, began to gain traction, sparking heated debates far beyond Millbrook's borders. Maria Suarez, too, was undergoing a transformation. Sitting in the jury box, she listened intently to every word, her notebook now filled with observations not just about the trial, but about the community she had come to call home. The stories of discrimination resonated with her own experiences as an immigrant, and she began to see parallels between the plaintiff's struggle and her own fight to be seen and respected. Quietly, she resolved to use her voice in ways she never had before, though the path ahead remained uncertain. Judge Hawthorne, for his part, wrestled with the enormity of the case. Late at night, he found himself returning to the photograph of his father, the inscription beneath it echoing in his mind. The law was supposed to be impartial, but he couldn't deny the human element that colored every decision. The evidence was mounting, and with it, the pressure to deliver a verdict that would either uphold the status quo or dismantle it. His once unshakable confidence began to waver, the lines between right and wrong blurring in ways he hadn't anticipated. As the trial neared its midpoint, the tension reached a boiling point. A key piece of evidence, a series of internal emails from Apex executives, threatened to tip the scales. The emails, obtained through a whistleblower, revealed deliberate efforts to sideline minority employees, couched in coded language that left little room for doubt. Alexis seized the opportunity, her cross-examination of Apex's HR director a masterclass in precision and strategy. Whitmore, visibly rattled for the first time, scrambled to contain the damage, his polished facade beginning to crack under the strain. The courtroom had become a crucible, forging new alliances and exposing old wounds. Each day brought new revelations, new challenges, and new questions about what justice truly meant. As the trial marched forward, it became clear that its outcome would not only shape the future of Millbrook but also force everyone involved to confront the deeper truths about themselves and the world they inhabited. The courtroom buzzed with an almost imperceptible tension as Alexis Carter began her opening statement. Her voice, steady yet impassioned, painted a vivid picture of the systemic injustices faced by Apex Industries employees. She spoke not just of statistics and contracts, but of lives, workers who had been overlooked, silenced, and denied opportunities. Her words resonated deeply with some jurors, while others, like Frank Delaney, shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the weight of her argument conflicting with long-held beliefs about the company that had been a cornerstone of his family's livelihood. Across the aisle, Charles Whitmore III sat with an air of calculated detachment, though his sharp eyes missed nothing. He scribbled notes on a legal pad, his expression betraying neither concern nor confidence. Yet, beneath his composed exterior, Whitmore sensed that this case was different. The evidence Alexis had hinted at during her statement suggested a level of preparation he hadn't anticipated. For the first time in years, he felt the faint stirrings of unease, a crack in the armor of his unshakable self-assurance. As the trial unfolded, key witnesses took the stand, their testimonies laying bare the practices that had long gone unchallenged. One former Apex employee, a middle-aged man with a trembling voice, recounted being passed over for promotions despite years of exemplary performance. Another, a young woman who had left the company in frustration, described the subtle but pervasive culture of exclusion. Each story chipped away at the carefully curated image of Apex Industries, and with each revelation, the gallery murmured in hushed disbelief. Judge Hawthorne, presiding with his usual gravitas, found himself increasingly unsettled. The evidence presented forced him to confront memories he had long buried, moments in his career when he had chosen the path of least resistance, avoiding difficult truths in favor of maintaining order. As he listened to the testimonies, his gaze occasionally drifted to the photograph in his desk drawer, its inscription echoing in his mind, "To uphold the law, without fear or favor." For the first time in decades, he questioned whether he had truly lived up to those words. Meanwhile, the jury's dynamic began to shift. Frank Delaney, initially skeptical of the plaintiff's claims, found himself grappling with the undeniable patterns emerging from the evidence. He thought of his father's pocket watch, a symbol of loyalty to a company that now seemed tarnished by its own legacy. Across the room, Maria Suarez felt a growing sense of responsibility. The courage of the witnesses inspired her to reflect on her own struggles as an immigrant and small business owner, and she resolved to approach the case with an open mind, determined to seek the truth. Outside the courthouse, the town of Millbrook became a microcosm of a larger national debate. Protesters clashed on the courthouse steps, their chants growing louder with each passing day. Local news stations broadcast live updates, while social media amplified the trial's impact far beyond the town's borders. Among the crowd, Jake Thompson, the young journalism student, furiously typed notes, sensing that this story was bigger than he had imagined. He resolved to dig deeper, determined to capture the trial's significance for a broader audience. As the trial neared its midpoint, a pivotal moment arrived when Alexis introduced a confidential memo obtained from Apex's internal archives. The document, a damning piece of evidence, detailed hiring quotas that explicitly disadvantaged minority candidates. The courtroom erupted in gasps, and even Charles Whitmore's mask of composure faltered. For Alexis, it was a hard-won victory, but she knew the battle was far from over. Apex's defense team would undoubtedly strike back, and the stakes would only grow higher. With each passing day, the trial became more than a legal proceeding, it became a crucible for transformation. The jurors, the attorneys, the judge, and even the town itself were being reshaped by the truths emerging in that wood-paneled courtroom. As Alexis prepared for the next phase of the trial, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The fight for justice was never easy, but as her grandmother's pin glinted under the courtroom lights, she knew it was a fight worth waging. The courtroom buzzed with a quiet intensity as Alexis Carter began her opening statement, her voice slicing through the silence like a scalpel. She painted a picture of lives stunted by discrimination, of dreams deferred and potential squandered. Her words were precise, deliberate, and laced with an undercurrent of controlled passion. As she spoke, Frank Delaney shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his grip tightening on the pocket watch. The pride he'd always felt for his family's legacy at Apex Industries now felt like a weight pressing against his chest. Across the aisle, Maria Suarez leaned forward, her brow furrowed, as if trying to decipher not just the words but the deeper truths they hinted at. Charles Whitmore III watched Alexis with a practiced calm, though his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He had faced formidable opponents before, but something about her unnerved him. She wasn't just arguing a case, she was challenging an entire system, one that had benefited men like him for generations. As he rose to deliver his rebuttal, his tone was measured, almost paternalistic, as he sought to discredit the plaintiff's claims. Yet, for all his polish, there was a faint edge to his voice, a subtle crack in the veneer of invincibility. In the days that followed, the trial unfolded like a chess match, each side maneuvering with calculated precision. Witness after witness took the stand, their testimonies weaving a tapestry of injustice, resilience, and denial. Among them was Evelyn Harper, 47, a former Apex employee whose dismissal under dubious circumstances had sparked the lawsuit. Her voice wavered as she recounted years of being overlooked for promotions, her achievements dismissed while less qualified colleagues advanced. Her testimony struck a nerve with Maria, who saw echoes of her own struggles as an immigrant trying to carve out a place in a community that often seemed indifferent to her efforts. Meanwhile, tension simmered outside the courthouse. Protesters clashed on the courthouse lawn, their chants and slogans a cacophony of opposing ideologies. Jake Thompson, the young journalist, moved through the crowd with his camera, capturing moments of raw emotion, a mother clutching a sign that read "Justice for All," a group of Apex employees shouting about loyalty and tradition. Jake's keen eye for detail and his growing understanding of the trial's broader implications began to take shape in the notebook he carried, the seeds of an article that would soon ignite a national debate. Inside the jury deliberation room, alliances began to form and fray. Frank found himself at odds with another juror, a younger man who questioned the fairness of a system that seemed designed to exclude. Their heated exchanges forced Frank to confront uncomfortable truths about his own biases, truths he had long buried beneath the comfort of tradition. Maria, meanwhile, emerged as a quiet but persuasive voice, her outsider's perspective offering a fresh lens through which to view the case. Her words carried a weight that surprised even her, a newfound confidence born of necessity. As the trial neared its midpoint, a pivotal moment arrived when a whistleblower from Apex, an unassuming HR manager named Linda Grayson, took the stand. Her testimony, delivered with a mix of fear and defiance, revealed damning internal emails and hiring practices that corroborated the plaintiff's claims. The revelation sent shockwaves through the courtroom, forcing Whitmore to recalibrate his strategy and leaving Judge Hawthorne visibly shaken. For the first time, the weight of the case seemed to bear down on him, the photograph in his desk drawer a silent reminder of the ideals he had sworn to uphold. The cracks in Millbrook's facade of unity were widening, and the trial was exposing truths that many had long chosen to ignore. As Alexis prepared for the next phase of the proceedings, she felt a flicker of hope. The tide was shifting, slowly but unmistakably, and though the road ahead was uncertain, she knew one thing for sure: the fight for justice was far from over. The courtroom buzzed with a tension that seemed to thicken the very air. Alexis Carter, her voice steady but her heart pounding, navigated the labyrinth of legal arguments with precision. Yet, beneath her composed exterior, she wrestled with the enormity of the task. Apex Industries had resources and influence that dwarfed her modest legal team. Every piece of evidence she presented, every witness she called, had to be airtight. She knew the defense would seize any misstep, and the stakes were too high to falter. This wasn't just a case, it was a battle for accountability in a town that had long turned a blind eye to its own inequities. Across the courtroom, Charles Whitmore III leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable but his mind calculating. His strategy was clear: dismantle the plaintiff's case piece by piece, sowing doubt in the minds of the jury. He knew how to play to their fears, their discomfort with change, their unspoken biases. Yet, even he felt a flicker of unease. The evidence Alexis had already presented was more damning than he had anticipated. For the first time in years, Whitmore felt the faintest crack in his veneer of invincibility. Judge Hawthorne, seated high above the courtroom, watched the proceedings with a heavy heart. The weight of impartiality pressed down on him like never before. He had always prided himself on his ability to separate personal beliefs from the law, but this case was different. The testimonies he had heard so far painted a picture of systemic injustice that was difficult to ignore. And yet, he knew that his every word, every ruling, would be scrutinized, not just by the people of Millbrook but by a nation hungry for justice or confirmation of its divisions. In the jury box, Frank Delaney's internal conflict deepened with each passing day. The evidence was undeniable, yet it clashed with the loyalty he felt to Apex, the company that had provided for his family for generations. He glanced at Maria Suarez, who sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Maria's perspective, shaped by her own experiences as an outsider striving for acceptance, had begun to challenge the assumptions Frank had held his entire life. Their quiet conversations during breaks hinted at a growing understanding, but the road to change was far from smooth. Outside the courthouse, the protests grew louder and more volatile. The crowd had swelled, a microcosm of the nation's divisions. Alexis could hear their chants through the thick courthouse walls, a reminder of the broader implications of her work. Among the demonstrators, Jake Thompson, the young journalist, scribbled furiously in his notebook. He had come to cover a trial but found himself documenting a pivotal moment in history. The stories he overheard, the raw emotion he witnessed, would shape his reporting in ways he hadn't anticipated. As the trial neared its conclusion, the pressure on everyone involved reached a breaking point. Alexis prepared for her closing argument, the culmination of years of work and sacrifice. She thought of her grandmother's pen, of the generations who had fought for justice before her, and of the future she wanted to help create. Across the aisle, Whitmore sharpened his final rebuttal, determined to protect his client at all costs. And in the jury room, 12 individuals braced themselves for the weight of their decision, knowing that whatever verdict they reached, it would echo far beyond the walls of Millbrook County Courthouse. The courtroom was electric with anticipation as Alexis Carter delivered her closing argument, her voice steady and impassioned. She painted a vivid picture of the lives affected by Apex Industries' practices, weaving together testimony, evidence, and a profound appeal to the jury's sense of justice. "This isn't just about policies," she declared, her gaze sweeping across the jurors. "This is about people, real people, who have been denied opportunities not because of their abilities, but because of the color of their skin. Today, you have the power to say, no more." Her words hung in the air, challenging the room to confront uncomfortable truths. At the defense table, Charles Whitmore III's polished demeanor showed cracks for the first time. The testimony of a former Apex HR manager, who had reluctantly revealed discriminatory hiring quotas, had unraveled his carefully constructed narrative. Whitmore's confidence waned as he glanced at the jury, sensing the tide turning. For all his experience and resources, he had underestimated the tenacity of Alexis Carter and the resonance of her cause. His closing remarks, though eloquent, lacked the conviction needed to dispel the damning evidence. Judge Hawthorne, his expression unreadable, instructed the jury to deliberate. As they filed out, Frank Delaney lingered for a moment, his pocket watch still in hand. The trial had forced him to confront uncomfortable realities about the company that had defined his family's legacy. He thought of the young workers who had testified, their voices trembling as they recounted being overlooked and undervalued. Across the room, Maria Suarez sat deep in thought, her notebook now closed. She had seen the courage it took for people to stand up against injustice, and it stirred something within her, a determination to fight for her own community's rights. Hours later, the jury returned. The foreperson, a middle-aged teacher with a calm yet resolute demeanor, stood to deliver the verdict. "We, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiffs." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom, followed by a smattering of applause before Judge Hawthorne's gavel restored order. Alexis closed her eyes briefly, the weight of the moment sinking in. She had done it, not just for her clients, but for every person who had ever been told they didn't belong. The aftermath of the trial was transformative. Apex Industries was ordered to implement sweeping reforms, including transparent hiring practices and mandatory diversity training. The verdict sent shockwaves through the nation, sparking similar lawsuits and legislative efforts to address systemic discrimination. Jake Thompson's article, capturing the trial's emotional and societal impact, went viral, galvanizing a new generation of activists. For Alexis, the victory was a turning point. She became a sought-after advocate for civil rights, her work inspiring others to challenge injustice. Maria Suarez, emboldened by the trial, founded a local advocacy group for immigrant workers, giving a voice to those often overlooked. Even Frank Delaney, once resistant to change, became a quiet but steadfast ally, volunteering with organizations that supported workplace equality. As Millbrook adjusted to its new reality, Judge Hawthorne reflected on his role in the case. The photograph of his father remained in his desk, but now it served as a reminder not just of tradition, but of the courage it took to evolve. Standing on the courthouse steps one crisp morning, Alexis Carter looked out at her town, her grandmother's pen gleaming in the sunlight. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, she felt the winds of change at her back. Now was the time for others to rise, to act, and to carry the torch forward. The trial of Carter v. Apex Industries became a crucible that tested the convictions, biases, and resilience of everyone involved. Over weeks of grueling testimony and pointed cross-examinations, Alexis Carter's unwavering resolve shone through. She meticulously dismantled the defense's claims, presenting hard data, personal stories, and a narrative that exposed the systemic inequities buried beneath Apex's polished corporate image. Her voice, measured but impassioned, resonated not just in the courtroom but in the hearts of those who listen, challenging them to confront uncomfortable truths. Judge Hawthorne, once a paragon of impartiality, found himself wrestling with the weight of his decisions. The case forced him to reflect on the legacy of his father and the ideals he had sworn to uphold. Late nights in his chambers were spent poring over case law and grappling with his own blind spots. By the time he delivered his instructions to the jury, his voice carried an uncharacteristic tremor, not of uncertainty, but of the profound realization that justice required more than adherence to precedent. It demanded courage. The jury's deliberations were no less transformative. Frank Delaney, initially resistant to the idea of systemic discrimination, found his worldview challenged by the testimony of workers whose experiences mirrored those of his own father, but with a starkly different outcome. Maria Suarez, whose quiet observations had often gone unnoticed, emerged as a voice of clarity and empathy, bridging divides and urging her fellow jurors to consider the broader implications of their verdict. In the end, the jury returned a decision that not only held Apex accountable but also sent a powerful message about the community's commitment to equity and progress. The ripple effects of the trial were immediate and far-reaching. Alexis Carter's victory became a landmark moment, cementing her reputation as a champion for justice and inspiring a new generation of advocates. Jake Thompson's article, published days after the verdict, went viral, igniting a national conversation about systemic racism in corporate America. Maria Suarez, emboldened by her experience, launched a local initiative to support immigrant workers, while Frank Delaney became an outspoken proponent of workplace reform, bridging divides in his community with humility and grace. For Judge Hawthorne, the case marked a turning point in his career. Retiring shortly after the trial, he dedicated his remaining years to mentoring young lawyers, ensuring they carried forward the lessons he had learned. And for Millbrook, the trial became a catalyst for change, sparking difficult but necessary conversations that reshaped the town's identity. The courthouse steps, once worn by the weight of history, now bore the imprints of a new chapter, one of reckoning and renewal. As Alexis Carter exited the building for the final time, her grandmother's pin glinting in the autumn sun, she paused to survey the crowd gathered outside. Among them were faces she recognized and many she didn't, united in a shared hope for a better future. Apex Industries * serves as a reminder that justice is not static, it is a living, breathing pursuit that demands vigilance, empathy, and action. Let this story inspire us all to confront injustice wherever it may hide and to strive for a world where equality is more than an ideal, it is a reality. The fight is far from over, but as Alexis Carter proved, even the smallest steps forward can create ripples that change the course of history.